Today on Woven Lives, we have travelled to the home of Mary Butcher. We are surrounded by the largest, most impressive collection of basketry books I've ever seen, and sea creatures suspended from the ceiling. Originally trained as a zoologist and botanist, Mary began weaving traditional baskets and chair seating in the late 1970s with basket maker Alwynne Hawkins, and went on to be taught by Barbara Maynard, Nellie Pilcher, Fred Rogers, and Ted Tween. Throughout her career, Mary has met a whole host of incredible basket makers from all over the world, often travelling to meet them and record their work. Mary has also co-curated influential exhibitions with professional basket makers such as Lois Walpole and Joe Hogan. Her contemporary work has involved collaborations with basket makers, artists, and designer makers such as Tim Johnson and Joanna Gilmore. In the late 1980s, Mary became course organiser for the Creative Basketry City and Guilds course and the trade advisor for the Worshipful Company of Basket Makers. She was also the president of the Basket Makers Association during this time. From 1994 to 97, Mary was appointed as Research Fellow at Manchester Metropolitan University and worked in the textiles department where synthetic materials were readily available. Mary began experimenting, researching, and communicating with these new materials, resulting in a dramatic change to her once traditional work. In 1999, along with Lois Walpole, Mary co-curated the groundbreaking exhibition Contemporary International Basket Making. The show and its accompanying book propelled contemporary basketry into the arts and crafts sector, resulting in the current interest in contemporary basketry in high-end galleries and shows such as Collect. In the 2000s, Mary's solo shows, Basketry Carte Blanche and Encircled by Lines, broke with convention of what was once perceived as basketry. Her playful experimentation broke away from reliance on technique. Mary rocked the basketry boat, creating delightful, unique work steeped in rhythmic line, using sensory materials with reference to the natural world. Her latest work, Considering the Seas and Where Have All the Flowers Gone, has a strong environmental message. Later in the 2000s, Mary co-curated several important shows: East Weaves West, Basketry from Japan and Britain with Laura Hamilton, East Anglian Basketry with Victoria Mitchell, and European Basketry with Joe Hogan. Mary says her work has introduced a wider public to basketry in all its forms, and she's successfully achieved this through making and exhibiting, writing books for basket makers and chair seaters, teaching many students at the City Lit, West Dean and Cambridge University Botanic Garden, and travelling extensively, collecting baskets along the way, documenting them and recording the patterns for future generations to learn from. Some of her collections are now in the safekeeping of the British Museum and the Kew Economic Botany collection. Mary has received many awards for her work documenting and archiving basketry. She says she is committed to the transmission of basketry knowledge, technical, historical, and contemporary. In 2012, Mary received an MBE for her services to basketry. Hello, Mary, and welcome to Woven Lives.
Hello, nice to see you here.
Thank you. You have met so many incredible makers throughout your career. It could literally take us all day to talk about them all. So can we go back to the very beginning when you first became interested in making? And can you tell us about why you began basket making and a little bit about your first teacher, Alwynne Hawkins?
Well, the very first eye-opening moment for even noticing baskets, I think, although my parents always had them at home, was when I came back from the States, having worked in a university there for a bit doing research on spiders, incidentally, which always amuses people. I came back with two objects, new objects. One was my mug from my lab work days, and the other was a beautiful Native American basket which I'd found in a junk shop and just was drawn to in some way. And when I got home, one of the first things that happened soon after was I went to a shaker exhibition at the V&A, I think it was.
Mm.
And there was a little collection of 6 tiny little hexagonal plaited baskets. And I just fell for them, I suppose.
Yeah. And
So,
that's how you got...
that opened my eyes. And then as we moved to Canterbury and I began to use the town as a shopping place and all that kind of thing, I began to see loads of the same kind of oval shopper, willow, white skeleton, brown weaving. And it was raised at the ends, and they were very distinctive. And I asked who'd made them, asked various people who'd made them, and I went out to buy one. And that was a pivotal moment for me.
Okay. And were they made by Alwynne Hawkins?
They were all made by Alwynne Hawkins,
wow.
and you'd see them all over the town.
Yeah.
Same model, you know. He was well known. It was a very small agricultural town at that time.
Okay.
No big universities or anything, quite different place.
And was he teaching at the time?
He was teaching a small number of people. I met a remarkable man that day, actually. He'd been the first grammar school person from Canterbury to go to Cambridge to read agriculture, because his background was definitely rural and agricultural. And he came back after 5 years there, did a master's degree as well, thinking that some of the old ways were the best ways and didn't really want anything to do with the modern fertilisers that were being introduced at that time and which now have become such a pest to us in many ways.
Yeah.
And he was a very thoughtful person, but he got rheumatoid arthritis, so he couldn't go on farming on his farm. So when I met him, he'd perhaps been 5, 6, 7 years a basket maker, part-time because of his arthritis, in a wheelchair at home, working at home. So a very different life from the one he'd expected.
Yeah.
And he had time, and he was very, very generous with it. So when I got there to buy this basket, my shopper, of course, he'd got organised to teach me. So he'd got the willow soaked and his kitchen set up. And
wow.
I didn't have the nerve to say I didn't want to.
So you'd only gone there to buy a basket? You
Yes.
hadn't gone there to make a basket?
No. No, I never even thought about the possibility. But I have always made things. And I just sat down and politely made something, a base to start with. Was sent home with some willow. Come back next Wednesday, you know, when you've got 4 or 5 bases together. And that was the beginning. And
do you feel like you got hooked straight away?
Yes, I did that afternoon. I really loved it. And I don't know, I mean, I have always made things as a child, you know, and I sewed a lot, and models and cardboard and wood, sticks glued together and all that. But something about the rhythm of it was just perfect. Plus the fact we just moved to Canterbury. I didn't know anybody. We had 2 children under 3. And it was quite hectic. And this was time out. I went in the evenings after the first visit.
Yeah.
And it was, yes, my time to really think about making something. It was nice.
Yeah,
very nice indeed, yes.
So did you, was you taught by him for some time then?
Yes, I went back once a week for
Okay.
about, more or less once a week for about a year or 2 years, 3 years,
lovely.
I'm not sure. And then they tailed off a little bit, partly as he got older and partly as I got busier in other ways. But the connection was there until he died almost.
Okay.
Yes.
So were you mainly making traditional shopping baskets?
Yes. He'd learnt from an article in Farmers Weekly and going to see a basket maker in a basket shop in Sandwich, Tom Carpenter, who was one of a family of basket makers. There'd been a workshop there for 2 or 3 generations. And when I left Canterbury, it was still a hardware store run by a Mr. Carpenter. So he sort of taught himself really from the magazine and from talking to Tom Carpenter, and practiced as you have to.
Yeah.
And he had time. And I suppose the Farmer's Weekly article told him where to get willow and stuff, because he wasn't gathering his own. He wasn't able to, really.
Yeah. So do you think he was using willow from Somerset?
I think so, yes.
Yeah.
From Stan Derham.
Oh, brilliant.
And I got from him until he stopped selling.
Gosh.
And it was beautiful willow,
Yeah.
really beautiful willow. And he was a nice man too. So
Was it mostly buff and white willow, or did you use brown
no,
willow
at that
as well?
time it was, Alwynne used white and brown very often. But most of the work in workshops was buff.
Okay.
And the agricultural workshops that still existed was brown. There wasn't much white about.
So you were travelling down to Somerset to collect from
Well, I
there?
think, no, I wasn't actually, because there was a weekly van that came straight from the Willows to somewhere in Sandwich.
Okay.
I don't know why, whether it was Carpenter's still, but I doubt it. So I just got bundles put on the van.
How lovely.
Yes, it was very
Imagine
convenient.
If we still had that
I know.
now.
And the cost was moderate by comparison with nowadays. Transport's horrible, isn't it?
Yeah, that's
Yes.
right.
So I got it that way.
Wonderful. Wow.
Yes.
So you then went on to weave with Barbara Maynard after
Yes,
this.
well, she was quite a character. She was another remarkable person, but she was pretty fierce, actually.
Okay.
And she needed students for the City and Guilds course she'd started.
Yeah.
And she was short of numbers one autumn, and she kind of went at me to come. And I said, well, I can only come if I arrive at 11 and go at 3, you know. But I did, and I'd had a lot of experience by that time.
Okay.
I joined the evening class in Canterbury with Nellie Pilcher, so I'd learned some cane work and chair seating with her.
Yeah.
And I did enjoy it, actually. And my mother-in-law, who lived in Canterbury, came and collected the kids from school or wherever when it got to that point, and took them to our house. And so it fitted all right, just about. But it was a bit hectic.
And what kind of techniques were you learning on the City and Guilds? Was it similar to the City and Guilds that we used to do, where you have blocks of different types of...
Well, it was
weave?
blocks, but it was nearly all taught by Barbara.
Okay.
And she was very good at the willow, fine willow work particularly, and the cane. And we didn't do plaiting and nothing with soft materials really, except rush, but not threads and, paper and all those other possibilities that we have now.
Had she put the course together herself?
I think she had, with the help of two HMIs, Her Majesty's Inspectors of Colleges, who wanted some creative basketry, because what was going on in old people's homes and special needs workshops and things was pretty unimaginative.
Okay.
It was edges for plastic trays and things of that kind, and these two inspectors wanted something else. And I think we provided it slowly. It changed. It was a bit... It morphed, in the way as we all learnt more. Barbara learnt more.
Yeah.
People like Fred Rogers and Ted Tween arrived to kind of help
Oh, fantastic.
with the teaching, which was lovely,
Yeah.
very supportive. Other basket makers wouldn't have anything to do with it because it was amateur,
Okay.
which is fair enough as well. If you've been an apprentice for 6 or 7 years, you kind of think somebody drifts in for a short day once a week is not going to come up with much. But so there was a slight frisson there between various groups, but Fred and Ted bridged that.
So you were the first year to do the City and
No,
Guilds?
I wasn't. No,
Okay.
I wasn't. The first one started in 1977.
Okay.
And I joined it in, must have been 1982 or 1983, I think. So I started in 1977, but in Canterbury, and had those years of experience, which helped.
And Barbara went on to write Modern Basketry Techniques,
Yes.
the book that we all know about today.
Yes.
And she also created the Basketmakers Association
She
as
did,
well.
with her first group of students.
Yeah.
Yes, which has been terrific, really.
It's fantastic.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, considering we've got 1,000 members this
I
year,
know,
haven't
I
we?
know, it's brilliant. It goes up and down. It was 1,400 at one point,
Okay.
and then went down. Now it's up again, with a very good journal,
Yes,
which helps.
absolutely.
The printing and
Yeah.
Kim and a colleague doing a good job on that.
Yeah, I
Really
think we're
good job.
seeing such a huge resurgence in basket making, aren't we?
We are,
But,
yes.
if
And there was
only-
another one in the, well, let's think, early 2000s maybe, late 90s, early 2000s. And then it slightly dipped, and now it's really going, I think it's on the, well, the standards have raised so much,
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah. You've really seen that over
I
your
have,
career.
yes, definitely. I think
Okay.
that's fantastic. I was surveyed by Helena. Do you know Helena?
No, I don't.
Oh, she's one of the City and Guild students.
Okay.
And she was saying that I was the most optimistic of all the older generation
Okay.
basket makers she spoke to. But I am optimistic. I think it's fantastic what's going on.
Absolutely.
And the skills produces beautiful work.
Yes.
Very well made. I think that's great.
Yeah, I think when I first started, like 25 years ago or something, it was really hard to find a course to go on.
Yes.
It's really difficult. You had to wait for the newsletter to come out, look in the back.
Pounce on it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Drive miles to get some
Yes.
some tuition.
Yes.
Now it's incredible the amount of courses that are available.
It's good.
It's a shame that Barbara's not around to see
It is.
the beginning.
She would have been thrilled to bits, I
she
think.
would have been
Yes.
so pleased. Yeah. So I also wanted to ask you about your travelling. You've spent such a long time travelling and meeting basket makers and documenting basketry around the world, which must have been so exciting.
It was
What a great
exciting.
opportunity.
Yes. The first of that, sort of the beginnings, was an invitation from Eva Seidenfaden to go to Denmark to teach.
Yeah.
And that was 94 or 5, I think.
Okay.
And I met so many Danish basket makers there. Terrible class of 28.
Oh my goodness.
2 of us shared the teaching, but it was still very hectic.
Okay.
But basket making was just kind of re-beginning in Denmark. They'd lost their tradition at that point, more or less.
I heard that, yes. So
Yes.
they've
sort of-
recreated
Yes.
a style and techniques.
Yes. Well, I think from my point of view, it was quite liberating to watch it because I'm mad about our traditional techniques, but you are slightly hidebound by them as well. And there, they didn't have any of that. So anything went.
Yeah.
You could just try whatever you felt like and put it together in any way you felt like. And that was and because they're a craft nation, if you like, they're trained in all sorts of hand skills. They ran with it. It was very interesting. And then I began to ask where our baskets related to in Europe. And I was told by somebody who'd been importing from Poland since 1929 that really the best baskets in Europe almost were made in Poland.
Oh, interesting.
So that sat there in my brain wondering if there was anything I could do about that. And Winston Churchill Travel Fellowship had, as soon as the border went down to Eastern Europe, the wall, they implemented 10 possibilities for going to Eastern Europe for anything. And I thought, well, maybe this is my opportunity. Yeah. So I applied for basket making and got it and went for nearly 8 weeks to Poland to travel to meet basket makers.
Oh, fabulous.
Scary. a 1956 dictionary. And yes, no sense, and a map, no sense of what I wanted to do or where I wanted to go, really.
So how did you even find the basket makers?
I went to, I found you start ringing up the Polish embassy in London.
Okay.
And you speak to the cultural attaché and you don't take no for an answer because they say they don't know anything about basket making. So you ring the next day and you get somebody different.
Okay.
After about 4 days spread out, I got somebody who said, well, there's an importer in North London. So I went to see him and he was very helpful with towns that made baskets.
Okay.
So I started writing to their craft organisation, Sepalia, and naming these places that I'd like to travel and things. But I left it very late. It was all I was so frightened of going, I put off doing anything about it at all for ages. But, well, it came to be. Got on a flight to Warsaw. I was also teaching physics at that time in a convent, an Ursuline convent school. And the nuns, of course, have Ursulines all over Europe, our colleagues. So I was put in touch with the convent in Warsaw, and a nun speaking French met me off the plane. So that was a good, very good base to have. I couldn't speak to them except this one, but they were very kind and it was comfortable and warm, safe.
And can you remember the first basket maker that you meant to visit in Poland?
The first one? No, not really.
Okay.
No, I can't. I don't know where I went first. I think I went quite early on to a basket village in the southeast called Rudnik, which had 400 basket makers in and around the town.
Incredible.
And I spent a couple of weeks there, I think, or 10 days or something. I can't remember exactly. And was taken down by somebody from Sepalia and introduced to all the workshops and things, which were kind of like factory basket making.
Okay.
But very skilled, incredible.
Wow.
So that was very exciting.
That must have been mind-blowing.
It was, because I'd never seen anything like it.
Yeah.
Like 50 basket makers coming in with their carts, still horse and cart in Rudnik at that time and around, stacked up. They came into the centre, which was really a wholesaler place, once a month with their ware. Lots of different designs. The Polish basket making still more ornate than ours, more decorative, but highly skilled, really brilliant. So I think that was probably my first plunge into it all.
That sounds incredible.
Yes, and I got taken to see people who used split wood, split pine mostly, who were around making punnets. They were just changing from wooden punnets to plastic punnets when I was in Warsaw the first time, which made my heart sink to see it.
You just got there in the
I
nick
did.
of time.
I've got a Polish punnet somewhere in the house from those early first days.
So were these baskets that they were making agricultural or household or a mixture?
A real mix.
Okay.
And different workshops did different things. So they had specialities.
Okay.
And they were all being collected at the warehouse place, the centre, and sent by train to the Baltic coast, to the ports, Gdansk, and sent mostly to Germany and Denmark.
Yeah.
But we got a lot here in this country too.
Incredible. And was it mostly...
It was domestic wear, it was agricultural work.
Yeah.
All kinds of things. Bread baskets by the 100. Everybody had a bread basket. All over Poland, everybody had bread baskets.
And so was it mostly men who were making, or a mixture of men and women who were makers?
A lot of them were women, interestingly enough. But yes, coming in, bringing their work in from their home small holdings and around, mostly men. But I think communism had been quite good for women's equality in a way that wasn't true here at the time. So women were quite often managers, which we certainly weren't seeing here in the mid-70s, early 70s.
That's fascinating.
Into the 80s.
Okay.
And this was 91, so the wall had just come down.
Okay.
So that old style working practice was still in place.
Yeah. And then later you went to Latvia and Hungary.
I did.
And did you do that on a different trip or straight after?
No, a different trip.
Okay.
Yes. And the Hungary trips, I had 2 trips to Hungary with the British Council. That was a grant that was advertised on the back of the Guardian, which was very useful. And for that one I got, it was even more communist still than Poland. And I got a government translator, interpreter, travelling with me, which was excellent. Because Polish language has a lot of French pronunciation, so I could cope with that a bit.
Yeah.
And I learnt to listen very carefully and could understand quite a bit. But Hungary is completely different from most languages that we know.
And did they have a similar type of basketry industry, or was it much smaller? Or
it was smaller. When I went to Poland, it was their 7th largest industry. In Hungary, it was smaller, but still extensive.
Okay.
And large workshops doing the same kind of thing, but different designs of baskets. So that was very interesting too, and completely different history of them, background to them.
In what way was it different?
I think because it had still been controlled by the communist state very obviously.
Okay.
Whereas there were people in Poland who'd kind of branched out and done their own thing a bit here and there, and you'd meet them in markets with their produce and their own baskets.
So they were being told which baskets they had to
I think
make.
It was more controlled in that way, yes. So you could see warehouses absolutely stacked with hundreds and hundreds of the same thing.
Incredible! Wow. And so were you collecting the baskets and bringing them back home, or were you photographing them and recording them?
Well, in Poland, I bought 250 baskets and managed in Rudnik to get them all collected there in the warehouse and sent on the same train in containers to Gdansk. And then they came over to a furniture importer that I'd met in Brighton, who very kindly helped with all the paperwork at Tilbury, to my huge relief, because they all had to be fumigated.
Okay.
And that wasn't easy because some of the rush baskets, of course, got very wet and couldn't dry in the containers. So were mouldy when they were opened, and there were various hitches with that, but he was very helpful. And then got them transported to Kent Arts and Libraries, who offered to store them and set up an exhibition with me of Polish and British baskets.
Oh, fantastic. And those baskets are now in the British Museum?
A lot of them are.
Yeah.
A lot of them got stolen from the Arts and Libraries store, which was very heartbreaking.
Joking. Wow.
So there's a limited supply of the baskets, but they're very well documented from photographs.
Okay.
And they're deposited at the British Museum.
Okay.
But the Hungarian collection, I brought those back through the Ethnographic Museum in Warsaw, because one of the curators came to help travel with me to one or two small towns, to a town that specialised in beautiful rush work, quite different from ours, lovely. And there they got gathered up by the Ethnographic Museum and sent over to the British Museum direct, I think, who froze them and things. It was all a bit more straightforward.
Yeah.
But a bit mad, really. Didn't know if it would work out or not. But, I had the grant. I used the grant money because I was living very frugally. And the British Council gave you £10 a day at that time, which kind of just about covered things.
Sounds like a fantastic opportunity.
It was, yes, really amazing.
And then later you went to Japan as part of an exhibition, East Weaves West. And you also did a similar thing there. You went to find basket makers in Japan too.
Yes.
And so that must have been a completely different experience. Was it?
It was very different.
Yeah.
It was 2005, I think I went for a month.
Yeah.
I'd come into touch. I'd known Hisako Sekijima in Denmark. I'd met her a few times and we'd communicated quite a lot back and forth, letters first, then emails. And she was a great help. She had a contemporary group who were very helpful indeed. But for the exhibition, we had to raise a lot of money because I wanted to bring the baskets back and I wanted the exhibition to travel a bit. And I wanted to bring Japanese basket makers over. So I asked somebody who was good at public art projects to help me raise the money. And we put in a fee for her to cover her costs. And we did. Through Japanese foundations and British organisations, we raised £84,000.
Wow.
Which gave us a catalogue and travel money for the baskets and things. So that was very good.
And were most of the, what kind of materials were the Japanese basket makers using? Was it mostly bamboo, or was it different?
Well, the traditional makers were using bamboo, and there are two kinds of traditional makers. There are the rural makers who made very beautiful indeed, but very specific baskets. One for catching dace, for example. Others different for different kinds of fish. Lots of traps, back baskets, because it's very mountainous in Japan. You need to carry everything on your back, mostly in the country. Yeah. But that was bamboo. And then there were the high-end basket makers who go to training either in a workshop, a specialist workshop, or at the basket school in the south. And they spend 10 years or something learning to cut bamboo and prepare it.
Incredible.
So it's incredibly fine and very precise and beautiful in a different way.
They're more contemporary makers, are they?
And they were using a lot of natural material at that time.
Okay.
Lots of different barks, lots of vines and creepers, which some of the traditional makers used as well. So it was very, very interesting. It was very, very difficult travelling, though.
Oh, okay.
Because there wasn't much English anywhere.
Yes.
And I did sort of stand on stations. I'd done it in Poland, thinking, there's one of this side of this platform goes to Madrid and the other side goes to Warsaw. I'm not sure where I should be, And it was worse in Japan. But I got around pretty much with a few hiccups here and there.
And then did you also bring baskets back from Japan as well for your exhibition, or
not really? Okay, I couldn't much because I couldn't carry them and I couldn't find a way of getting them here. But I brought some very traditional baskets and used them as suitcase type things, packed them to bring them back. So not much, no. But that asking people to send came later.
Okay. You've also researched into basket making in East Anglia as well.
Yes.
And you featured makers like Colin Manthorpe, Len Wilcox, Ernie James and Terry Bensley. Some of who were apprenticed basket makers who worked long, hard days on the plank, repeat making for industry. How important do you think it is that present-day basket makers learn to make patterns and baskets from past basket makers?
Well, I've thought about this quite a lot, really, but I do think that, first of all, the discipline of learning how to make them is an important thing. You can get the discipline in other ways, of course, but that is one way to measure for volume mostly, not linear measures. And that's a very precise business and quite complicated. But also they're very beautiful objects and they fulfill particular functions. And for years, when I was still a zoologist, the current thinking in ecological terms was that we may run out of oil, and that is a finite resource, and that we would need other materials in the future, probably. Of course, at that time, plastic wasn't so prevalent. So I've always had that idea that we might need to make these things again or something fulfilling the same function. But also it gives you a whole range of techniques which you can use in all kinds of ways.
Yeah.
And they are very precise and they work. So why not try and continue them in some way or another? So I don't think they're redundant objects in any way.
No. The archiving of the techniques is so important in a way, isn't it?
Because I think so. Yeah. I really do think so.
A lot of contemporary patterns and contemporary baskets go back to the traditional technique, don't they, and kind of change them or develop them in some way.
That's right. And with that kind of in mind, I've recently been... I've got the opportunity to go through my decades of notebooks, which I've kept for myself through learning, and when I've heard a bit of history or been in a class and done rapid drawings for myself, and all that. I've got the opportunity at the moment. I'm going to try and spend the next year going through them to make those drawings clear for others.
Yes.
And annotate a bit if I need to and that kind of thing. While redacting some of my shopping lists and people's phone numbers as well. But that's kind of a nice opportunity because I think they're worth keeping.
Do you think you're going to make these into a book?
Well, possibly.
Oh.
Got to live a long time.
Okay.
I'd like to.
Yeah.
Yes, that would be a good plan, I think.
Yeah, lovely.
But the notebooks have been digitised and they're all at Merle in Reading. So when I've redacted them, they can be visible, but they're useful to me, but not to everybody yet quite, I think.
Yeah. And later on, you created this fantastic exhibition with Lois Walpole, Contemporary International Basketry. Why did you decide to co-curate such a groundbreaking exhibition? What was the inspiration?
Well, the inspiration actually came from the Crafts Council, I think. And maybe Lois lobbied them a bit, I don't know, because I wasn't in that world at the time at all. And yes, we both became curators with different remits, but we both selected all the work with people from the Crafts Council.
Yeah.
Yes, it was, and I don't think either of us knew what the scope of it would be.
Okay.
It was a bit of a surprise,
Yeah.
And novelty. I'd done city lit exhibitions and things and a few others. But
do you enjoy co-curating with other
Yes,
people?
that was kind of more distant than it might have been because Lois was put in charge of the kind of design elements of the actual exhibition itself, and I was asked to deal with the catalogue in whatever various forms I wanted. And actually a company was called in to do the design work for the show itself with metal trellis and all sorts of things, which was beautiful actually. So Lois collaborated with them, I think, rather than with me because I did the book.
Okay, I was going to ask you about the book because I love this book so much. It's my go-to book, and I especially love the questions like, what is a basket? You have at the start of the book all these different questions that you've asked the exhibitors. What is a basket? How important is chance in your work? And do you refer to yourself as a basket maker? And they're really important questions that I think have stayed relevant over the whole of the 25 years since you did the exhibition. And can you explain why you decided to create this book to go with the exhibition?
Well, I was asked to do a catalogue, and then Merrill Hopeton, who are a new publisher, said they'd publish it with, and they were very helpful. And we had a very, very good book designer, so all of that was down to them in a way. Although I did have say in where things went and stuff. But I wanted it to be as comprehensive as anything I could think of at the time. And it's important what people feel about their work and their job and their livelihoods, and I think, and what their impetus was. So those questions were from me. But really putting it together was a family business. I had to do it in 3 months.
Gosh.
And that was really hard work.
I bet, yeah.
And my husband's very wordy and clever in that way and was very helpful. And my daughter is a very speedy, properly trained typist because she's a musician and needed to do her own programs and notes and things. And my son read everything and made comments. It was really fantastic, actually, to have all that help.
Yeah.
So it was all kind of spread all over the sitting room floor, all over the place, because it wasn't computer at that time, it was typewriter. My mother-in-law typed it. She was a trained typist too. She typed some of it. So it kind of was a family business, which was quite good.
It's a beautiful book.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So do you feel as though you're in the research that you've been doing over all this time, do you feel like that's influenced your work? Your own?
I'm sure it has. I think you can't help seeing all sorts of things and they stay in your head. And it's difficult to know where you saw it altogether or when it became an influence. So that's hard to know exactly where it came from. But I, as a child, I was really interested in handwriting. And, I was taught round Marion Richardson at school, and I deliberately decided to teach myself Italic, which I didn't succeed completely, but I did have quite distinctive handwriting, which I enjoyed doing. So I think some of it's come from looking at all that calligraphy.
Okay. And how did your research fellowship at Manchester Metropolitan University change the way you work? So you started off as quite a traditional maker with Alwynne.
I did, and I'm very pleased to have done that, and made a lot of fruit picking and hot baskets for the Kentish trade, and cherry baskets, and all those things that agriculture around me needed. But Manchester was just an eye-opener, actually, because I belonged to art and design, so I taught in all kinds of departments. And the most important thing, really, was that my office was in embroidery, which was not what I thought embroidery was. It was lovely copper stitches on huge tree trunks and all kinds of things which I hadn't really seen before. And it was also attached to an enormous, like a warehouse of studios. And every student for the 3 years of the course and graduates had a little tiny space there. And there was new work pinned up nearly every week on everybody's boards, and I could walk through that and look at all these wonderful things that the students were producing.
Very
little
inspiring.
tiny pieces of inspiration.
Lovely.
It was, yes.
A great environment to work in.
It was. It was really very good. They don't have that big studio anymore, I think.
Okay.
But it was just an incredible resource.
And so were you making there as well and using the materials that the other students were using?
Yes, I could do. So I could raid their boxes of, that were sat around the studio of textiles and plastic bits and recyclable stuff and all kinds of things, really. And I lived up there with an embroiderer who was very inventive and very good at, very clear about what was successful and what wasn't of the things I made, which was very good as well.
So suddenly you're almost like your palette changed from willow to of a whole variety of materials, synthetic materials as well.
Yes, it did, yes.
And this had quite a large impact in the way you worked.
I think it did, yes. It changed.
That's very interesting.
Things. So at the end of the fellowship, I had to either write a report or do an exhibition. So I did an exhibition with 3 other people, not from the university, so Shuna Rendell, Alex Berry, who was a basket maker at the time, and Sally Help Wentworth, I think. Anyway, a textile person.
Yeah.
And we set off on this big exhibition, really quite big. And I had to do something, for it, so I made some contemporary work, which gave everybody a huge surprise.
Are these the cones?
Quite nice. Those 3
huge
cones.
cones that you made, they're incredible.
Huge floating cones, yes. And I enjoyed doing them. And I'm still doing things like that.
Yeah, you like to suspend your work. I've noticed.
Yes, I do.
It kind of helps the material to fall in a way, doesn't it?
It does. And the movement.
Yeah.
If there's a gentle breeze or somebody touches it, that you get that moiré effect, that shimmer as you walk past. I like that.
Especially with the sea creatures. There's one hanging right near my head right now. It's absolutely gorgeous. I've never seen one.
Haven't you?
No, not in real life.
Not real life,
I've only seen them in the books. But seeing it now in real life, it's just beautiful. The way that you've curved all the material at the bottom, it has a lot of energy.
It does, yes, I think so. And that comes from my zoological background, I think. Yes, squiddy kind of things. Yeah. But it's washing line, actually. The whole of it's cheap washing line.
And is it copper that's going around that edge?
Some of it, yes. Well, there's a cane band that spirals in various ways, and then it's thread, most of it.
Beautiful. So I was going to ask you about your creative process. Can you describe What
Well,
happens? Do you have an idea? Is it the material that you're starting off with, or are you thinking about something from nature? Or
yes, I'm probably starting with some idea, like the sea, or I did a lot of fish at one time as mobiles, big fish. And then it's about rummaging in my materials boxes to see what I want to use and what colourways, and that certainly sets me going, yes. I've had to ditch a lot of materials in moving recently, so
what a shame.
yes, I don't know how I'll get on with the new collection, sort of what's left. I'm sure it'll be fine.
So you think materials play quite a large part in your making process?
I think they do,
Yeah.
but I still love natural materials
Okay.
as well, bark and leaves and all kinds of other stuff.
Do you like mixing them together? So
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
I think they have a possibility to do that. And I like using fine line somewhere in there with threads.
Yes. Yes, I was going to ask you a question about line. So your work contains really beautiful lines, and you had your exhibition encircled by lines, and they have space around them. There's like strong curved lines held in place with like very minimal weaves and cable ties or knots. And the lines make patterns or rhythms or cast shadows. So how important is line, like really important?
Fundamental?
Okay.
Yes,
yeah.
I think it is. I think
Okay.
when I like something or am satisfied, as far as one ever is satisfied, it's because the line is what I wanted it to be.
Okay.
So yes, and that I think comes from the calligraphy in the beginning.
Of course.
Probably.
Yeah.
I don't know, but it's certainly tied up with that. And my love of plants and how they grow and things too, I think. But yes, it's basic rather than space inside. Gaps between, they're very important.
Yeah, you leave a lot of space between each line, don't you?
Yes.
So
often,
you
yes.
can almost like see the line. The line is standing out. It's quite prominent, isn't it?
Yeah, I hope so. Yes.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Mm.
And can you explain about your most recent work, which I saw on the Westin website, which is called Considering Our Seas and Where Have All the Flowers Gone? Is environmental sustainability quite an important
Yes, I think
aspect
it's
of your work?
terrible. It's really heartbreaking what we're seeing at the moment. I think it's dreadful. I mean, even in the 80s, I'd go into my garden and I'd find 40 or 50 meadow browns around the marjoram plants. And now we're asked to do the butterfly count at the moment. And, I'm scraping up 5 butterflies, if that, in the 15 minutes. And only one of each, And concern about that started when I was a zoological student. Okay. We were very concerned then. Didn't know about climate change, of course.
No.
But we did realise that diversity was reducing fast. So that was a theme in my research then.
Do you feel like that's becoming stronger, that theme
Definitely.
in your work now?
Well, definitely. But I also, in those 2 exhibitions, one of those pieces was for Turner Contemporary in Margate, and one was for Ruthin, one of those very good exhibitions in Ruthin. And it just seemed like an opportunity and what I was most concerned about at the time. And I quite liked that assembly of bits and pieces, some from my workshop and some homemade, as it were.
And so the final question, which I'm asking to all the people I'm going to interview, is for all the people who are listening who are at the beginning of their basket making journey, what advice would you give to someone who's starting out as a basket maker or a designer maker or a contemporary maker?
Yes. Well, I think probably first of all you have to feel that passion for it. And that probably would be evident pretty soon. A love of the materials you're using, even if it's not willow, whatever. And the process. And then you've got to be persistent. There's nothing can replace constant practice. It is definitely a repetitive skill, whatever you're using, like anything. You know, being a musician, being a ceramicist, you need those 10,000 hours or whatever it is that we're meant to need. Probably basket making might be less than that, I don't know, because in some ways the material dictates some of it. I don't know about that. But so persistence, and then even if you're very traditional and wanting to go on being traditional, you've got to be open to people's requests, because you're very dependent on people wanting different things all the time. Otherwise you're making the same thing all the time, as the apprenticed basket makers did, and that's exhausting for most of us. We don't really want to do that all the time. So versatility is good. The other thing I do think is very important, and it's boring, you have to be good at the office stuff, or at least reasonably competent. Because if you don't reply to people, or you don't send the invoices, or you don't follow up things, people don't like it. And I understand that. So there's that aspect of it as well. You've got to be, or get some help with all that business. Because it's demanding, and nowadays it takes a lot of time. It always did, but now on the telephone in past times, now email. And then I think you've got to be excellent at it. You've got to strive to be excellent, whatever you're doing. And then you've got to enjoy it thoroughly, because that shows, if you're not enjoying it, it shows in the work, I really do think. So lots of different characteristics kind of come into play. Some of them you can train yourself to, and some of them are built in, I think.
Yes, that's great advice. Thank you.
Okay,
and thank you so much for talking to us. It was an absolute pleasure.
Well, pleasure for me too.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.